All right, welcome back to the House Committee on Government Operations and Military Affairs. We have had a few requests for testimony on H-140 and Act relating to requirements for state funded grants as we look at trying to prepare for picking up a committee amendment to that bill. Today, we're just going to hear some testimony on that for the end of our afternoon and have invited few guests to testify, and I believe Sheriff Anderson. You hear me okay?
Good afternoon, yes.
Good afternoon. So thanks for being willing to join us. We are expanding our look into state-funded grants and contractors and sort of payment timelines. And so I was hoping you might be able to offer us your perspective on H-140.
I'm happy to, Mr. Chair. Committee, good afternoon. For the record, Mark Anderson, Sheriff of Windham County. In past hearings, I have been here in my capacity as president of the Sheriff's Association. I am not here in that capacity today. The Sheriff's Association did not have this bill on our radar, so it will soon be on their radar as well. But I am offering the comments on behalf of my department. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to this bill. I think that you will have witnesses that are going to be more impacted by sheriff's departments. Not to say that the sheriff's departments will not be impacted, but I do think that this, I could understand through grants that my department receives from the state of Vermont and business that we do with the state of Vermont, all the reasons why this could be valuable and important. One thing that I think it's important to bring up, and I try not to bring up prior bills, but S-17 gave us an insight into some of the state's practices, especially when we talk about de minimis rates or indirect spending. I bring it up not because I'm the expert, but it was one thing that we learned during it, or during that body of work, is that the state does charge indirect rates to the federal government, which far exceed what other places are. So I would just suggest the committee, if it looks to continue with that portion of language, that the committee investigate where and how different departments within state government represent their indirect costs. I think that it's important to recognize that many organizations that depend on grants to deliver the various important services they provide, they do have administrative expenses that are often interesting to navigate, especially with federal funds. One of the things, as you've heard with sheriff's departments, that it's a complex system of funding. We do depend, my department depends on grant funds from both the state and federal entities. One grant that we use is for the Windham County Highway Safety Task Force that funds 4 law enforcement agencies in Windham County to deliver traffic safety, crash reduction, impaired driving, and distracted driving enforcement efforts. We also receive federal funds to administer training programs for driver's education, excuse me, not driver's education. We don't do driver's education, driver's safety training. And so one program that I'm really proud of is called the Windham County Highway Safety, the Enhanced Teen Driver Safety Program. What we have seen over the years that we've run this is a deputy sheriff who goes into driver's education programs, who delivers an enhanced version of training that offers the student, along with their parents, an opportunity to use driving simulators and gain some skill sets that they don't normally get through driver's education training, which we have seen a consistent reduction in motor vehicle crashes involving teen drivers for the last roughly, I want to say 7 years that we've operated the program. It's remarkable that our county is the only one where we are giving this program, and we are seeing remarkable reductions. That's because of federal funding. There's administrative cost to that. There is transportation costs related to it, in addition to just the payment for the development of the curriculum, maintenance of the simulators, and whatnot. My department also receives funds through the Department of Public Safety. The Department of Public Safety provides a variety of different grants. We actually were just receiving funds to get body-worn cameras that will replace our aging fleet of body-worn cameras that are about, at this point, probably about 8 years old, 7 or 8 years old, and they are starting to fail. So that will allow us to continue with that. Those again come through a funding provided by the Department of Public Safety. We also apply for grants through the Department of Public Safety under the Homeland Security grants. And so those are things related to, I'm not going to go too deep into details in this type of setting, but things related to public safety and to protecting Vermont. Sometimes these funds are available to be applied for, but we can't use them for weeks, months. And when we are targeting, I'll say impaired driving, when we're targeting that behavior that we want to stop, if we're not doing impaired driving through Thanksgiving, New Year's, Christmas holidays, well, we're missing one of the primary times that impaired driving occurs in Vermont. If the federal funds aren't there to pay for us to do it, we're not doing it. So even if it's been allocated, and there are ways that allow us to do it, but it still means my department has to write essentially an interest-free loan to the state and or the federal government to provide these services, which, as you know, the way that we are funded, it makes it difficult to do that. We being applicants to I guess two state agencies, it is sometimes frustrating to follow different application processes, application forms, requirements, not necessarily knowing what the metrics are that you're applying under, not knowing what the formula is, or if it's a competitive grant. It's frustrating when you are competing with other municipalities, other sheriff's departments, other eligible entities, while also competing with the state of Vermont. And not to say that there's not need, not to say that everyone is looking to do different things, but sometimes when it's the people administering the grants or evaluating the grants, it can cause frustration when you don't see the inside workings. We also apply to federal grants directly. We're applying for one right now through Department of Energy to get solar panels, which we're doing as a direct applicant. What was really nice is to be able to go on grants.gov. It's a federal website that just centralizes everything, and be able to fill out the information that the Department of Energy needed for us to be able to continue this. We later took advantage of a slightly different program, which is called a voucher, and that minimized the grant application, so we didn't need to use grants.gov, and ultimately we were able to expedite some of the process for that. The only feedback, and I think this is minor feedback to the text of the bill, in section 1, sub BA, big A, it's the top of page 2 on draft 1.4, lists municipalities, nonprofit corporations, for-profit entities, and individuals. Sheriff's departments are a unique entity in Vermont under Title 24. It is defined as a legal entity unto its own right, and I would just ask that after municipalities that either sheriff's departments or counties be considered as additional language, as this would very much apply to what we do. I'm happy to answer any questions about this, but those are my comments in brief.
Thank you very much. Questions for Sheriff Anderson? It sounds like to me that that your department has been both a recipient of state grants and direct federal grants in the past. And if I understood your testimony right, the application process through grants.gov is streamlined and much easier on the federal side than the way we administer grants on the state side. On the back end of getting paid, once you've been awarded a grant and sort of met the requirements of the grant, done the work or performed the programming, et cetera, are you able to get paid in a more timely fashion from those federal grants versus the state grants?
Let me walk you through the process. So I will answer your question initially, and then I'm going to walk you through the process. Specifically using my highway safety grant funding. Yes, we're able to get the money. No, it is not fast. The federal fiscal year runs October to September. And so we usually get what's called a notice to proceed, which is authorization that the money is in or will be received by the state of Vermont. They will pay for it, as long as we operate within the grant parameters, but they're not paying for it right now. And so 1 year, we did not get the grant documents, the actual contract to sign with NHTSA and the Highway Safety Office. I want to say it was roughly February. Now that was an extreme example, but no less. We basically lost all of the time that we would provide these highway safety enforcement services on the federal grant funds. Once we received once we received the grant documents, then we could apply for reimbursement under that, and that often would take roughly a week for us to process, followed by roughly a week for the state to process, followed by roughly 7 to 10 days for the treasurer's office to send the funds to us. Once we got October processed, and that was with 0 activity, then we could apply for November. So we couldn't just say, let me bill for October, November, December, January, February. We had to apply each month, and we'd have to wait for those 2 to 3 week turnarounds. It got to a point where we were able to work with the Highway Safety Office. I do want to be clear that the partners we work with within state government, they're all great in working with. The processes themselves are what's frustrating. But that's also part of federal grant funds. So we would work with them, and sometimes we could expedite our processing time and their processing time by lining things up. But that's very much an ad hoc system to say, hey, let's work together so we could get 2 months kicked out in 2 weeks as opposed to 1 month kicked out in 2 weeks.
It sounds like the longest delay is in the availability of the grant agreements to execute. Is that fair to say that that's kind of the biggest pain point in situations like that?
That's what my department experiences for sure when it comes to funds administered through the state.
Any other questions for Sheriff Anderson? I really appreciate you coming in on what doesn't seem obviously to be a bill that's about sheriffs. We appreciate you making yourself available to give your perspective on this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, committee, for your time.
Great. Committee, I just need to confer with our committee assistant quickly. We're gonna probably in the time I thought we might pick H641 back up after this testimony. We're probably gonna hear an amendment around 3:30 if I can get everybody in here on it on H850 around the elections pieces. Okay. So just air traffic control here. So our next witness is Weiwei Wang. The correct pronunciation of your name?
You almost got it. It is Weiwei Wang. Yeah.
Wang.
Yes.
I had asked a couple of people and did not get 100%. So I'm going to file that away in case you're here in the future. Thank you for being with us today.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me. And I would love to be here in the future as well to provide testimony. My name is Weiwei Wang, she, her pronouns. I am a co-executive director for the Vermont Professionals of Color Network. We are a statewide organization with the mission to advance the social and economic prosperity of the community of color across Vermont. And I just want to say, because I don't know if everyone knows about us, but we do a lot of work to connect community around workforce development, business development, things like that. We see ourselves as a public asset, and because we do support the community in many ways, whether it's navigating resources, disseminating information, again, helping businesses thrive. So I'm really here because I know that you all have heard testimony from some of my bigger colleagues about a month ago. And I wanted to share about what it's like for a smaller, newer organization, because we were informally founded in 2019 and we became a 501c3 in 2021. So we're relatively young. But in that time, we've actually had the opportunity to have contracts and grants at the municipal, state, and federal levels, federally through a subaward with VTSBDC. And currently we have a contract with the DED and also a Grow VT grant through Think Vermont. And we've had some contracts and grants through other departments and agencies in the past as well. So I just want to say that our partners have been great. Big shout out to Tim Tierney over at ACCD. He's been so wonderful. And I do want to state, though, as I read through the bill, I don't have the most recent version of it, but I really appreciate what this bill is trying to do, because the cost of what we do as an organization, it is not reflected in the grants that we're receiving, because there is a lack of standardized there is no standardized process, whether it's application or receiving or management. And so we're having to create everything on our own. And so as a small nonprofit organization, we have 5.5 people right now. We aren't able to pay for like larger applications that can kind of streamline the process of reporting, invoicing, et cetera. So literally I'm doing everything on my own. And there are a lot of costs to, creating proposal, writing a proposal. I think that ranks anywhere from like 60 to 80 hours of energy per proposal. And then once we receive it, meeting with the points of contact, making sure we have everything submitted. So the time of receiving the getting notified that we received a grant to the time that we actually are able to receive are starting the project can go anywhere from a month or more, depending on the grant or contract. And then we have all of these meetings. So none of this is often reflected in the actual budget itself. So thinking about that 10% indirect cost, I was trying to figure out what ours might be based on some testimony from a previous individual, and I couldn't calculate it out, but suffice to say, for example, for one of our projects, we use Asana as our main project management tool, and the way that Asana is managed, we have just enough people, and we're paying about like $1,000 per year, which is a lot for a small nonprofit. So these costs add up quickly, and 10% of a grant or a contract just isn't sufficient enough to account for these smaller payments of these tools that we're using, workers' comp, et cetera, all of these other costs, and also the time it takes to actually put all of the administration work is really what I'm trying to say. And let's see, what else would I like to add? So I guess what I'm trying to say is that a standardized and simplified method of applying for, receiving, and reporting to the state for these opportunities would be so great. And having a higher indirect rate or possibility for nonprofit organizations, especially small ones, where we're manually doing a lot of this work, would be wonderful. And I'll also just add, ironically, I've had grants where I've put into a lot of work into invoicing for an opportunity, and using the form that was given to me by my point of contact, and like early on in the process. And when I submitted my first invoice, I was actually told that I had to resubmit using a different template because the one that I used was not sufficient. And when I opened up the template that was given to me, turned out to be my own template with my VTPOC logo on it and everything, including some of our organizational information. So my point in telling that story is, if there is a streamlined process, if there is a grant management portal, it would make things so much easier. It takes a lot out of the guessing game of what each department, each agency is looking for. And that would cut down on a lot of the time of reporting, and maybe even need for more of my time, administrating some of this work. So it was just a little anecdote I wanted to throw in. I can open it up to questions specifically from the representatives present.
Questions for Ms. Wong? Representative Nugent.
Thank you. Could you describe your experience invoicing and getting payments and time and how that all tends to go?
Yeah, I will say that right now with our DED contract, again, Tim has been wonderful. I don't know what magic he has, but we have been getting paid pretty quickly. In the past, it has been, we have gone through some waiting processes. Maybe I don't know the mechanisms of it, like the sheriff had noted, like he has some of the ins and outs, but there have been times where we have waited like several months for payment. I'm very fortunate now to be working with Tim, who gets them out really quickly right away. And we do see payment within the month, I think. Usually I submit it at the beginning of the month. But we are fortunate that we do have some donors where we can, we're able to make that difference up during the month when we haven't received that payment. But like early on when we started, it was very difficult. We've had to have a lot of fundraising efforts in order to kind of cushion us before receiving any of the payments. So, and then, if you miss your deadline, you're waiting for another month. And so it just becomes difficult. And, what I think part of the reason that we've been fortunate is that with the ACDDED contract, we are invoicing on a monthly basis. But I will say that takes a lot of time and effort and energy to be invoicing on a monthly basis. So it's kind of like a give and take of like, okay, I can invoice on and get regular payments within a pretty timely manner, but I'm also spending a ton of time on the reporting side of things.
Excuse me if I missed this in your testimony. We're having a scheduling thing that I've been slightly distracted by, but I wanted to ask you a similar question to what I asked Sheriff Anderson which is if the timeline to getting grant agreements for execution is part of your experience with being a recipient of state grants.
Like the challenges
related to, you sort of get awarded a grant, and you're like, yes, we've got this grant and we're going to do this work and we actually have to start doing the work, but we still haven't gotten the grant agreements.
Yes. Yes, that has been our experience. And I don't know if it's I think it's the process, because we have to go through all of the paperwork. And even when what I find interesting, and again, I don't know the exact mechanisms. For example, we have the ACTD contract, and then we also have that GROW VT. It's all under ACCD, right? And yet we have to submit for each contract or grant through ACCD, and I imagine for any other agency, we have to submit another certificate of insurance, even though it says the exact same thing. It just says state of Vermont. So the time it takes to actually get that certificate of insurance from us and then to move it into the process, it stalls the process, because sometimes that's the only thing that we need to do. And then it's also, going through the contract sometimes with the grant contract office and making sure we're all on the same page. So there are all of these steps. Again, I'm newer to the state grant and contract process. So it does, like, when the difference between when we expect to have the funding and then when we do receive the actual award. But then you also have to realize that often with grant contracts and grants and contracts through the state, even though you're awarded, let's say you start in June, you're awarded the full contract. You're still waiting to invoice for that first month or 2 months or quarter. So you still don't have the money. And so the money has to come out of somewhere. So that's a lot of extra work, fundraising, and that's a staff time that doesn't go into the project itself.
Other questions for Ms. Wong? Thank you for coming in and sharing your experience with us.
Thank you. I really appreciate the time.
Representative Nugent, was there anybody else? So those are the only names I had printed on the agenda, but I know we've.
Not sure how to say that last name.
Didn't do any of the scheduling, so I don't know who's here and who's not here. I'm sorry.
Hi, everyone. I may be next, but I don't want to jump ahead of anyone, but I don't think I was on the original schedule.
You were not, and I apologize. So we have our usual committee assistant is out, and we have had fabulous substitute help today, but we're on our third committee assistant, and that is part of why we're a little bit less organized than I'd like to be. Also wanted to make sure that I was saying your name correctly. So if you could tell us that first, that would be really helpful when you introduce yourself. Thank you for being with us.
Of course. Thank you for having me. Hi, everyone. My name is Blaine Antense. I'm here from the Vermont Health Equity Initiative. And yeah, if you're ready for me, I'll go ahead. I'm here to speak on H140 as well, but first I'll tell you about our organization. We're a group that tackles health disparities in Vermont through partnership and advocacy, but we really started out during the COVID-19 pandemic, and we're one of the groups essential in helping reduce the vaccination disparity. And in that time, we received a lot of sort of funding from many different organizations, but the state was one of the funding sources. Since then, we've been propelled into the world of health equity, and we do sort of tackle that in multiple ways throughout the state. And one of the reason why I'm here is a lot of the health equity work that happens in the state is state funded. So I'm specifically speaking to Section 1A today that calls for a streamlined and simplified grant management form and reporting process. Specifically because the payments administered through something like the reimbursement model that then have to be reported through the state's reporting process end up being often lengthy, complicated, and inconsistent. And unfortunately, when something's not standardized like this, it ends up producing a lot of delayed payments on groups that are filling really essential gaps in our community. So really what I'm trying to do today is highlight the impact of the delayed payment system through a few examples in our organization and also others. And I feel free to ask questions as we go, or at the end, we can just make this a conversation. One example that I want to offer is that in 2021, our organization, like I said, was really at the forefront of vaccine equity for BIPOC Vermonters. And for over a year, every weekend, we ran BIPOC COVID-19 clinics that ultimately reduced the disparity to 0%. And we're really proud of the work that we were able to do and the massive staff that was able to be part of it. But we were running clinics every day for a year, every weekend for a year. And even though once we had a state contract, we found ourselves sort of time and time again unable to make payroll for the staff that joined us at these clinics every week, especially during the pandemic, which was sort of a stressful time to be out in the world, interacting with people who weren't vaccinated, coming to be vaccinated, but weren't vaccinated. But there are many instances in which we weren't able to pay them on the timeline that we had originally said that we would. And we ultimately had to sort of explain why we didn't have the money to pay folks for their time. And sometimes the funds arrived up to 3 months later when the standard is generally around 30 days. Although the pandemic were truly unprecedented times, I offer this example as one of the ways that we sort of let our community down. As an organization, we let our staff down, and it's sort of not a great place to be. We were able to find other funding sources, and we had to resort to those funding sources. The Racial Justice Alliance ended up filling in when the state couldn't pay on time, as well as the city of Burlington. They financially supported us to make it happen while we waited. And unfortunately, sometimes we even paid out of pocket for costs. And, you know, on a few occasions, although I wouldn't do this again if I had to, we even sort of had to pay some of our staff out of pocket as well. And I know that comes with a lot of complications, and I know it's not an example that's really great to hear. But I think it was necessary for the times and the work that we were trying to do, but I just never want to be put in that position again. That example is one that sort of sticks with me, although it was a few years ago. Organizations run into this type of thing a lot because of delayed payments. And because I think relatively one in seven of Vermonters, I think, is employed by a nonprofit. It's not really siloed to just groups like ours. There are so many nonprofits employing so much of our workforce that we really need to figure out a way that when state and federal contracts come down, that the payments that the state is entrusted to make come on time. The second side of that I think often is not part of the conversation, but I think an important one, is that delayed payments often debilitate trust at multiple levels in the system. I worked a lot with organizations who received the CDC Health Equity Grant that closed out this December. And one of those was the Lamoille Health Equity Collaborative. And they shared a really compelling account of the way that the delayed payments heavily compromised their organization and the trust that their organization had within the community. The rules of this grant from the CDC and the guidelines that came down were sort of changing over time. The timelines changed over time. And a lot of times what folks thought was going to be reimbursed ultimately wasn't. So the rules were changing sort of as people were already paying for things and as groups were already paying for things. They would submit the reimbursement form and later find out that the things that they had originally thought were covered were not. So the fiscal agent, Lamoille Health Equity Collaborative, is then put in the position to be the one to let organizations know why they couldn't be reimbursed. And then they're also the ones that have to deliver the news and take the brunt of managing the frayed relationships with the community organizations. The sort of quote that stands out to me from their director is that the trust and confidence was frayed at every level. So at the state level, at the fiscal agent level, and at the community organization level. I bring up all of this to specifically highlight how delayed payments in the reimbursement model can really, really debilitate small community organizations. And I have to highlight that these community organizations are even more debilitated when they're BIPOC run or they're rural organizations, which operate on super limited funds, but are also more likely to rely on the trusting relationships that they have within their communities. These groups are often the ones that are filling the gaps in the social protection systems that the government isn't quite ready to do on its own. So in conclusion, I'm really here to testify in support of Section 1C, in support of the whole bill, specifically Section 1C, to speak to the delayed payments and the impact that has on community organizations, and also highlight the Section 4 on working groups is also, I think, a really essential component, because I think that the state funding systems could be improved on many fronts beyond what the bill already says. And I think that the working group is a really important way to chip away at that over the coming years. So thank you for your time. Please let me know if you have any questions.
Questions for Ms. Ntensay? Representative Byron.
Thank you. I want to touch on what you were speaking to about the out of pocket. So to me, that means you were taking your own personal money, or other members of the organizations were taking their own personal money to cover the overhead expenses, I'm just clarifying, of the organization due to delayed payments from the state.
Correct.
Wow. Okay. So what kind of timeline were you seeing past what was understood in the contract to receive payment, right? It's a 30-day. Were you looking at 45 days beyond the 30? Were you looking at 90? What kind of range?
I think the longest range was around 2.5 to 3 months.
Okay. Nope. And
I can get more exact answers for you, actually, if that would be helpful.
I mean, I'm just checking in with you because we've been hearing similar things from folks, but the range is, the overlay's been pretty similar to its most extreme. Now, the items that were understood to be reimbursable but found not to be, how often and how expensive did that get?
Yeah, I think that's a good question too. The I I think I'd have to come back with more specifics. This is a sort of a story that I'm elevating from the Lamoille Health Equity Collaborative. But what I will say about that is that there are many dynamic forces in that specific grant coming down from the CDC through the states to organizations. The complexity that those dynamic forces offer can be very simplified by, at least at the state level, there's a lot of clarity and standardization in what is reimbursable, when it's going to be reimbursable. This is how you do it across every department. And I think that alone, although there are some factors we can't control, like what the CDC is saying about the grant or the timeline or anything, what we can control is at the state level, how we manage, our own relationships and our own flow of funds. And I think that's the most important part there.
Understood. Okay. No, that's all I have. I mean, I think I might just be conflating a little bit like my private sector hat with my nonprofit here. But just the fact that employees were covering operational costs due to delinquent payments by the state is absolutely blowing my mind.
Yeah,
That's
I
just
think
a
that
statement.
was.
I'm not looking for an answer. That was just
It's sort of
moment.
it does the same, I think, for us. And again, I know that that's probably not the best way to operate, and I share that anecdote more so to share how dire things were, especially during the pandemic, which we all know how dire things were. But it is one of the most concerning ways that community organizations, especially ones like mine, especially other organizations we've collaborated with that have deep personal stake in the work that we're trying to do. For example, the clinics that we were running there were saving people's lives, essentially, and the lives of BIPOC community members like myself, like my family. There's a lot of duty that we have to the work that we're doing, and there's a lot of personal stake and at times personal risk that we'll invest in the work that we're doing. It goes beyond just the job. I'm sure a lot of people can connect with that, but when it comes down to small community organizations, I think by and large, many leaders of these organizations would do something similar if they were put in the same position.
When the Lamoille Health Equity Group was facing those delays in payments and was struggling with, what do we do, and sort of just moving ahead with paying people out of pocket and those sorts of things, what was the response that they got from the state level partners about that? How was the communication with the agency, and which agency was it that was it the Department of Health that was funding that work?
Yeah, the funding did come through the Department of Health, but I think the thing that I would actually invite them to speak on this specifically, to share with more detail. But what I will say is, in my understanding of their account as well as mine, I can see that everyone at the state is doing what they can do to make the process smooth. I think that especially all of the people that I've worked with directly, I know are trying to do what they can to minimize the risk that the state has to take on, and to make sure that they're working within the federal systems as best that they can, because their responsibility is to make sure that tax dollars are being spent fairly. So I can tell that they're doing what they can. I think that the breakdown is within the system itself, in that even when everyone is doing what they can, even in crazy times like the pandemic, because there isn't a systemized process like a standardized form, that's a lot of back and forth happens, a lot of mistakes happen, a lot of, oh, actually, we needed you to sign the form in this way. Oh, actually, you forgot this thing. In a standardized process with standardized forms, a lot of that is eliminated. And at least that instance of the reimbursement model, we can sort of cut down on and be fair.
Any other questions from the committee? Thank you so much for sharing your perspective with us. We have been in touch with the administration, and we're hoping over the next week or so to further amend H-140 and try to get something together where we can make as much progress as we can this year. And I think there was a real acknowledgement from the deputy secretary that they'd like to be in a better place with the timelines of payments and the completion and execution of grant agreements. So I think we all are recognizing that there's a problem and it's just a question of the timeline of how we look at some of these solutions. So I really appreciate you adding your voice to the need for us to take some action on this.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you for making space for it. I appreciate it.
Have a great day.
You too.
All right, committee. So I think we have everyone here early, a minute early, to switch gears. We've been asked to weigh in on an amendment to H 850. So that's the bill regarding changes to the Ed finance formula and balloting authority for extending budget votes for school districts. So I think probably the best way is to have the sponsor representative come up and present the amendment, and then we'll hear from legislative council, and managed to get the Secretary of State's office on very short notice. So thank you, Deputy Secretary, for coming across the street. So Representative Toosh, your amendment. So folks, on the House Ways and Means Committee's page, I think we can find this amendment.
Yeah, I apologize, I didn't send it over. I was under the impression to send it to Ways and Means since they had possession of the bill, but it's a very small, it does a lot with just a small sentence, but
So it's not a simple little amendment.
Yeah.
It's a complicated little amendment.
it's small, easy to read.
Okay, it's there.
So folks have got it.
Yeah.
Great.
Is it today's Ways and Means?
Yep, today's Ways and Means under Representative Toosh.
Pretty short.
Yeah, not on the screen. We use our devices here, but it might be good to put it on our page. If it can.
Yeah.
I know where this language came from.
All right. Simmer down. All right, Representative Toosh, go ahead. Please tell us about your amendment.
Thank you for having me. For the record, Representative Casey Toof, I represent St. Albans City, St. Albans Town, and I'm on House Education. Basically, so I'll just go over it. It's in section 4, subdivision A3. It basically just strikes out the words "who applied for early or absentee ballots for the district meeting." The intent of this language is to require all districts or all municipalities who opt to extend their deadline for the budget for school budgets. It'll require them to just mail all active registered voters, similar to what we do for the general election. So basically, it'd be a universal mail-in ballot initiative for those that opt to extend their deadline, so it gives it a little bit of time. And instead of just the ones that have requested it, it's going to just all active registered voters. I was talking to Ways and Means, and Representative Beck actually mentioned, and I probably would amend the amendment. I don't know what the process for that would be, but it would be if a school budget had failed and they have to warn it again, then that would be another, I would want a mail-in ballot for that. And I'll give a little background for it. The reason I think this is a really good initiative is we do this already for our general election. I'm not telling you guys anything you don't know, but we do it for the general election. We do it for a good reason. We get better voter turnout. And on our town meeting day, we are making a budget decision of $2.37 billion. And that's a pretty big ask of voters. And so when they go to the ballot and I want to cut down any confusion they have. So if you go on town meeting day, you vote, and then they're like, well, there's going to be another vote April 10th. There might be some confusion. I already voted. I don't know if I have to go. I've already voted off the weekend. Instead, they'll get a ballot sent to them in the mail. I've had constituents come up to me and say, I only vote when the ballot comes in. I don't go to town meeting day because I get my ballot and I get sent to me. It's neat, it's easy, it's comfortable, and I can send it out. And we don't do that for all elections. We just do that for the general. So for me, this is really important, and it's obviously something I'm going to look. If I get reelected, it's going to be something that I want to extend going down the road. But I think that it's a really important thing. I think it gets more people engaged in our process. I think it's easier for the voters. I think we'll get more people to turn out. As a matter of fact, when we went to mail-in voting, we saw a huge increase in participation across the state. And I want to see that continued, especially when we're making budget decisions like the one we're making this year.
Representative Mrowicki.
Thank you for coming in. Now, when the Secretary of State's office sends out the ballots
Mhm.
for the general elections, our town clerks don't have to do that. Does your amendment here have the Secretary of State's office sending out those ballots?
It would be how we're doing, like, so what, I forget in the bill how they're doing it is whoever requested it, so it'll just go to the whole thing, so whatever the
So
bill.
that means you're asking the town clerks to take this on. Have you talked to the town clerks?
I have not talked to the town clerks.
I will.
Yeah, I know, I hear that concern, and that's like the big concern that I hear, but I'm also hearing a lot of anxiety, a lot of pressure from my constituents about the potential of their property taxes being increased by 20% across the board. There's a lot of anxiety, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of people don't understand the process of why are you voting in Montpelier for my property taxes to be raised 20%. And I said, well, it's not really what we're doing. It's a local decision. We make that. So I want that. I really want this process. I want more people involved in this process.
So I keep hearing 20%. Is that a definite number?
It's not a definite number. That's the projected.
So you
property
keep using
tax.
the 20% though.
Yes,
Would
that's
you
what
qualify that to say that it's not certain it's 20%?
we won't know the full
Well, you
extent of
keep
it
saying
until the
20%
results of the vote through. Would you want me to say, I don't have the. We just had testimony in House Education and House Ways and Means Joint Committee. It went from 19.9% to close to 21% increase potential based on the yield. And that's kind of where I just say on average about 20% across the state is what I've been hearing.
So I want us to respect the percent of the amendment and also just note that we're being asked to weigh in on the budget mechanics. And I understand that the context is about the property tax changes, but I'm going to hopefully try to stay focused on what's in our jurisdiction here and just kind of bring it back. So thank you, Representative Tooth and Representative Mrowicki. Did I see you, Representative Waters Evans? You had your hand up?
Yeah, I did. Thank you. So if I remember when we were talking about it last week, there was $500,000 appropriated to the Secretary of State's office to cover some of the expenses for revoting. Would the cost of this, because it's a substantial cost, come out of that budget? Would it come out of town budgets? Who would?
I think what my intent would be, it would come out of that, but there would probably be some more money that would have to be appropriated for this, just because of the large scale of if so many districts end up doing it.
So many,
But I think when you look at the grand scheme of the $2.37 billion budget, that's really just not that much money when you're looking at how much we're actually making a decision on. And I will, like I said, so my goal and intent is to get more people involved and have consistency in the process. So the money, I understand, would probably have to be more appropriated. But I think when we look at engaging more voters and getting more people engaged in the process, it's really, to me, in my own personal thoughts, not that much money compared to the overall scheme of the billions of dollars that the Ed Fund is looking at.
Nugent.
I'm sorry if you may already have said this, but how are local elections running now? Are all ballots mailed to all registered voters?
On town meeting day, they're not. So there are some that just do it from the floor. This will not affect that. The ones that do have the Australian ballot. Right now, we don't have it in statute to have a mail-in ballot for town meeting day. I've brought this amendment to the committee here, I think 3 years in a row. And I think that every time it's been rejected for whatever reason, but I want, like, the goal, my overall goal would be to have town meeting day included in our mail-in ballot system, as well as any other special elections or any other elections. I just think it's a really good tool. We've seen really good success for it in our general election. And I'd love to see that success boil over to our town meeting day. But right now, it's I walk in, I have to, request, just like it used to be before we did universal mail-in ballots. So I have to request it, or I have to show up on the day to vote.
So Representative Toof, I'm going to invite Kirby to switch spots with you. Please feel free to stick around for.
And I appreciate it, and I thank the questions, I think the committee's time, but I also, this is an evolving one, because it's not, this amendment isn't like perfect, like I said, there could be an amendment to the amendment, but I do appreciate the questions. There's a really good conversation on this. Thank you.
No, thank you.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Kirby Keaton, Legislative Council. Give you a bit of background. This was actually drafted by Beth St. James. I think you know that Tucker and Beth and I have all been working together on this bill because it crosses over education, GovOps, and tax. So I can tell you what I can about it, but Fred Tucker would probably be the best one if you had questions about the election side of things.
I think the only thing we really need from you is the confirmation of our understanding that the Toof Amendment would essentially make it so that if a school board elected to rewarn their budget article, that new vote that's contemplated in H850 would, if we adopted the Toof Amendment, that would mean that all active registered voters in those districts would be required to be sent to ballot.
That is correct.
And this might be more of a Tucker question, and we might be able to get help from the deputy secretary on this. But my understanding of that would be that it would be the town clerks, the local election, well, really the school district clerk, which is typically one of the town clerks' responsibility to manage the administration of that.
That's absolutely my understanding. I don't see how it could be a different way.
Any other questions about the words on the page? Kirby, thank you.
Yeah.
I'll have you stick around.
We're curious about the.
It's a simple bill.
Yeah. I'm more curious about the.
It's a simple amendment.
Folks who are impacted by the words.
It's 1 sentence long.
Thank you, Deputy Secretary, for being here.
For the record, Lauren Hibbert, Deputy Secretary of State. Nice to be with you this afternoon, and thank you for the invite. The Secretary of State's office just briefly reviewed the Tooth Amendment on a cell phone. So, and we had a brief conversation back at the office. We just want to make clear that we support universal vote by mail whenever feasible. We agree with Representative Tooth that it does expand access for voters. It makes it easier for voters. And when the state has moved to universal vote by mail, it's been a very considered and deliberate opinion with some lead up time. We currently have universal vote by mail only for the general election, which is in November. All other elections are in person or by absentee or early ballot. Some elections obviously also occur on the floor. So with town meeting, there's floor votes, and then there's Australian ballot towns. Some of the Australian ballot towns have informational meetings beforehand. But there's lots of different ways that Vermonters vote. For this town meeting, there's the added complication of the presidential primary, where someone has to declare their party in order to vote in that primary. So lots of complication, and the school budgets are adding to that. Things logistically that we're concerned about with the amendment as drafted. First and foremost, it's really the timeline. To be clear, the Secretary of State, the School Board Association, and the Superintendent's Association issued a big guidance document to all of our town clerks, school district clerks, to school boards, and to superintendents in one communication from all of us in a coordinated fashion. And that was yesterday. So we are advising that school boards, if they choose to cancel their budget article or articles or their entire meeting, they need to take a vote. So that body needs to take a vote to do that. Then they need to issue a revised warning of when the vote on the budget articles or the whole entire annual meeting for the district will occur. And then town clerks need to be incorporating that into a new ballot. So there's a lot of logistics of people and time. And then H850, as it's currently drafted, requires all of those logistics, including the ballot being executed by the voters and counted by April 15th. So it is currently the day before Valentine's Day. And that's a lot of logistics to fit into that timeframe. The other logistics that really differentiate this from the general election in November is town clerks administer this election independently. So when we have universal vote by mail in November, we have a contract with a vendor. That vendor is given an upload of all of our voter profiles, and those ballots are automatically sent through a third party to the voter. Town clerks are not stuffing ballots. Town clerks are not printing ballots. They're done by the third party vendor, and that's a significant difference. So we are concerned that if this were to pass, that it would be expensive, particularly a lot of staff time, which can cut both ways. In large communities, it's a considerable amount of ballots that will need to be mailed out. And without an existing contract, that will be done by the town clerk. And then in small clerks' offices, we have town clerks who are only open, 2 afternoons a week. So that's a lot of work to put into that process, into those constraints as well. The budget, the $500,000 that's currently for voter outreach, it would include space rental for the rewarned vote. We worked on that number, not anticipating a universal vote by mail. So I agree with Representative Toof. If we were to move forward on this amendment, if this body were to, that number would need to be reconsidered because I just don't think that that is a significant amount of money to cover that. We also have some communication concerns. School district clerks are not always town clerks. They frequently are, but it's not a guarantee. And the other thing that's a complicating factor is school districts are not always within one town. So school districts can span many towns. So there can be one school district clerk across many towns. So just the coordination of those logistics, we can foresee may be an issue as well. But primarily it's the timeframe that this request is being asked for town clerks in particular to do, and the constraints that will put on school boards to make this decision faster than they may be ready to, and then how will that all affect the town clerk? Printing a ballot takes time. It probably would have to be outsourced, and then the stuffing of the ballot. Logistically, we don't think it's possible for a town clerk to enter into a third-party contract to send out those ballots before April 15th.
Representative Hank.
Thank you. All really valid concerns. I mean, I thought of some of these myself. The only thing that I don't really know, and probably none of us know, is how many school districts are actually going to take advantage of this option to revote. And if they do, are they larger school districts that would primarily have one municipal clerk administering it? Or would they be, a bunch of really tiny towns that are only open a couple of days a week? We have no way of knowing this. So I think the object of this amendment is in good faith. It's an option for allowing for or encouraging more people to voice their opinion in what is a very important vote. I just don't know the answer to my question, so it's kind of hard to take a stand on this.
Well, Representative, I don't know the answer to your question either. I think it's evolving this week, and school boards are meeting this week. So we may have a better sense in the middle of next week, how many school districts are taking advantage of this.
It's really, if it's just a few towns or a small number, it might be feasible to do within this time frame.
Well, and I think if I may just expand on that, I think that there's a question of equity for voters. Should your ability to voice your opinion depend on if your school district, assuming that we're saying it's better for voters to have the ballot mailed to them, should it depend entirely on if your school district changes your vote? What if you never receive an Australian ballot, never vote by Australian ballot, but it's a floor ballot? There's some equity issues in how Vermonters vote, and singling out universal vote by mail for only towns that or school districts that move their budget raises some questions that I don't know the answer to. I don't particularly think the Secretary of State has a position on, but should be considered.
Thank you. So that April 15th date, that's the date that the vote has to take place on that day or before.
That's correct.
Can you remind me, what is the time frame usually for sending out, if you do the universal mailer, what would the time frame be between when the voters would receive them and how long they have to return them?
So for voters who are overseas, it's 45 days.
That
can't happen at this point. And generally, we are recommending 30 days.
Okay.
More we can.
I don't expect you to have this number off the top of your head. So if you don't, could you get back to it with a number? When we send out ballots to every Vermonter in the general election, could you tell us the cost?
It's fascinating you asked me that question today.
Oh,
because I asked the question today and I have the answer.
Okay, look at
It is 1 million, almost 1.3 million.
Well, Deputy Secretary, we have one more witness. I was able to get a town clerk to zoom in on short notice. This is the most witnesses I've ever gotten within the hour that we decided to hear something. So clearly there's some interest in this particular topic. So Deputy Secretary, if you want to stay with us.
Thank you very much.
We'll have a quick committee discussion after Mr. Now, Mr. Arsenault, are you an Arsenault or an Arsenal? Because up in Franklin County, we have both.
He's trying to speak with you.
I have an Arsenault, Mr. Chairman. And it was hard in coming because some of you may know I've spent nearly half a century doing radio in Brattleboro, and people kept pronouncing it wrong, so I used a different surname for all of that. So it is Arsenault. And I am the town clerk in Vernon. I've been here for 8 years, and also the vice chair of the Vermont Municipal Clerk Treasurers Association Legislative Committee. We as an association nor as a committee have not taken any position on this. However, I do want to say that I am very concerned about turnaround time. We are a community of roughly 2,300, 1,800 person checklist, and I've got to say that with 60 hours of staff time in my office in a week, turnaround time would be tough to get everything out in a timely fashion to make sure that it came back. I would be very worried about smaller towns that don't have the kind of manpower that I have. And I know that at times I'm stretched during election season. So I've got to say it's a big concern for me.
Mr. Arsenault, one of the reminders that the Deputy Secretary gave us was about towns that have multi-member school districts. And I'm wondering how, if there was a school board of a multi-town district that decided to delay their budget vote, what additional complexities would that bring in for you or your fellow clerks who are having to manage that?
That would be trying to make sure that ballots got out to all people in a school district in a timely fashion, that would be extremely tough. We, as some of you may know, our town pulled out of the Brattleboro Union High School District as a result of Act 68 to have better control of our own facilities. We are a member of the supervisory union, but all the other towns in Wyndham Southeast are part of one consolidated district, and that would be rough trying to get ballots out to everybody from the smaller towns to a town like Brattleboro that has nearly 9,000 voters trying to get a universal ballot printed and then out to everybody in a timely fashion. I would be very concerned that it would not take place the way it should.
Any questions for Mr. Arsenault? Well, thank you very much for sharing the clerk's perspective. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we have a little committee discussion about this?
No, just that a reminder, Mr. Chairman, that the Clerks Association is holding its legislative day in the card room on Thursday, and I look forward to seeing many of you on that day. So thank you again for your time.
We look forward, as always, to seeing you and your colleagues as well. Thanks for the reminder.
Thank you.
There's something, the production value of the GovOps committee today. We've even got like advertising in there, a little plug for the clerks. Absolutely love that. So committee, I want to open this up for a little bit of discussion and take a straw poll on this if we can. I remember distinctly when Mr. Senning was here for his last bit of testimony. I think Representative Higley floated just similar idea of having a universal vote by mail. And I think we've heard some of the concerns that Will brought up echoed in some of the testimony today. I just wanted to start off the committee discussion by saying, I really hope that we can get to a day where we can affordably and effectively do universal vote by mail for every single election. I actually think that that's the direction we should head in. I think the Secretary of State in her old job when she was in this chair said similar things, and we haven't yet been able to kind of get over some of the timing, logistical concerns of moving from the kind of big coordinated, we've got a universal checklist, it's all, you know, printed and shipped from a third party that does big printing and mailing and controlled at the state level, to how do we manage that with different ballots, and especially on this tight timeline. But I want to echo what Representative Hango said. I mean, I think Representative Toops here in good faith saying we would have more participation if we could just mail all these ballots out. I don't think we're ready yet is the challenge, and I'm hoping that we get there and can afford to do it. But Representative Byron, go ahead and kick us off.
No, thank you. I recall this being the idea that was tossed out in a press conference recently by the administration. In that moment, in that soundbite, I was, you know, that's something we should look into. I started sniffing around on it a little bit independently and started realizing these barriers that existed where the implementation is more complex. Where the implementation is more complex than the thought itself might originally imply. And as we are really asking municipalities, constituents, and voters to really understand the difficulties surrounding the decisions that are moving forward with 850, you know, asking the municipal clerks to really take on a load like this. And I never really thought of it from an equity standpoint until it was raised just now, where you have municipalities and means that may be able to navigate this a little bit more effectively and functionally. And then smaller ones, this could be a serious work burden on small staffs. And then when you're putting, you know, I'm shifting to my operational manager hat of 30 years in restaurants. When you start asking people to do more in a high stress environment on a tighter timeline, you are really asking for there to be more mistakes made in theory and applied function. So I think this is a great thought that has a lot of landmines thrown into it that we need to take into consideration. And I think the landmine awareness on this needs to be pretty high.
Saw a bunch of hands, Representative Nugent and then Representative Hingham.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's sometimes in this discussion, it feels like it's easy to make the same arguments on both sides of this question. But I think in this case, context really matters, and we are so close to the time when we need to warn this meeting. It's already, there's enough uncertainty, I think, in the state around the budgets to start with, to try to change how we do local elections in this big of a way. At this point, seems like unwise and just adding more potential chaos into the system. So I understand like the access issue, and I think that is a universal benefit, but I think in this case, it's just would not help the situation.
Representative Hingham.
Thanks. I was just looking at one of the charts that was provided by Ways and Means about the school districts who kind of gained and lost in all of this, and just throwing this out here for knowledge for everybody, that some of the school districts that probably would be revoting are not the tiny ones that we were talking about that probably had district clerks that only worked part-time. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yes, if you want. Representative Morgan.
Yeah, I mean, I conceptually like it. I'm just concerned, like, I think it's resonating on some level, time and money. I just don't, it might be a bridge too far right now.
I mean, I really think next year we should start to look at what would it cost, what would it take, what would the mechanics be of getting to a future where, because we said we were going to do, and in the times we're in right now, I wasn't ready to put a bill on the table as the new GovOps chair to do that, absent a lot of input from the clerks and other stakeholders. But I want to get there eventually. Representative Higley, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'm concerned, about the whole process, and I think how important it is that the School Boards Association and Superintendents Association reaches out to our school boards so that they have a good understanding of it. And then I think it's even going to be harder for the general public to have a good understanding of it. I have a real concern that I know a lot of times my districts get so frustrated, a lot of times they'll just automatically vote no. And, that's a concern for me. And it is difficult to figure out. I mean, I looked at the increase or decrease in the district statewide weighting chart. You have to make a decision for yourself, what your towns might either benefit or not. But yeah, it's a tough one. And I know for my small towns, it would certainly be an issue this year to try to pull together a fully mailed out ballot to everybody. So yeah, I think it's going to be enough of a struggle going forward to have everybody have an understanding of what we're trying to do. And yeah, we're just going to have to do our best to try to bring that understanding to our voters. Thank you.
So Carol Dawes, our Berry City clerk, and frequent flyer from the Clerks Association. I couldn't resist the opportunity to get a little testimony from you on this. Thanks for coming in last minute.
Not a problem. For the record, Carol Dawes, I'm the Berry City Clerk and Treasurer. I'm also the co-chair of the Clerk and Treasurers Association Legislative Committee. And thank you so much for the opportunity to weigh on this. Yeah, we don't support it for a couple of the reasons that have already been voiced. It's certainly a financial one. It would be an extra expense to school districts when we're trying to control expenses. And the other thing is that, to me, it creates a couple different sort of classes of voters. We already have people that have requested ballots and have received ballots for the articles that are warned for the school election that will continue to be voted on. School board members, other things here in Berry City, we're voting to reallocate funds from the fund balance to the capital fund, as an example. And that's a distinct group of voters who have requested ballots or who vote in person. And then we would be creating a different class of voters to vote on the budget if it were delayed by mailing ballots to everybody. And it just doesn't feel quite balanced.
Thank you for that perspective. Any questions for Ms. Dawes? Well, as always, we very much appreciate your input.
Happy to be here.
So committee, any further thoughts before we take a position on the TOOF amendment? This is just a straw poll. Obviously, we don't have the bill, but I was asked to weigh in before Ways and Means gets out on the floor tomorrow. So, any hands? All right. Representative Ricky.
I just want to commend you and the array of assistants pulling together some really helpful information in a short amount of time. So I know stuff like that doesn't just happen. So I want to acknowledge that to start with.
So we have been blessed in this committee having a consistent and really fabulous committee assistant who is out for family reasons right now. And today, the whole committee assistant crew has kind of stepped up to help us out. And it didn't miss a beat, really. It's been really incredible. So thanks for being the third person in the relay. But you've all been, and I threw a whole bunch of last minute audibles at you. So definitely appreciate you just kind of going with the flow and being poised through all of that. So thank you. So committee, are we, yes, go ahead, Representative Hank.
Thank you. If he's still here, yes, I want to thank Representative Tu for bringing us this amendment because, as you said, it's something that you're thinking about. And I do feel like the April 15th drop dead deadline is really, it's tough. And much as I would like to support it, I don't know if I can because I don't see how it's all going to unfold. And I wish it was a different deadline. I wish it was a little bit later.
Representative Tu.
I just want to thank the committee for the consideration. I do want to point out that we keep saying timeframe. I've been bringing this for about this is my fourth time bringing this amendment to the committee. So we've had 3 or 4 years to worry about it. I think it was the first one was during the pandemic. So that was in March or April of 2020. So I think one message we send to voters on a no vote or unfavorable vote with this is that their vote doesn't matter when it comes to town meeting day, but it matters just for the general election. When we get elected, I wish we could just see some consistency. I understand the time constraints, but I think we do owe it to the voters. So that's just my last final pitch. I appreciate the time. I appreciate all your input and I appreciate the process here. And I appreciate you.
Thanks. I just want to say, we have a lot of bills on the wall, but I don't think there's been a bill with the kind of broad support from all the stakeholders that are involved with managing and executing our elections and the communities that we all represent saying we're ready for our local elections, which are different from our general election. They're managed differently, and I think we heard a lot of the reasons why it's more complicated and fraught to go to a universal mailing for local elections. And yet I'm still thankful for the reminder that that's something that we want to look at in the future. I think the questions that we've had about and the concerns about the timeline are really about in the context of H850. Is this the right thing to do now for this particular budget article and rewarning for many of these districts. And yeah, the districts on that list who I think are going to be impacted the most by the change and took advantage the most of the 127 cap formula. There's a lot of towns and a lot of voters that could be impacted kind of overnight, and it could be pretty chaotic if we do it now in this context. And so, you know, I don't think this is the time to do it, but I think we need to have that full, thoughtful conversation in the coming couple of years and definitely do this eventually. But we also need to think about what is it going to cost? And I'm pretty sure that one of the reasons that that bill isn't on the wall right now is that nobody wanted to put up the probably $2 to $3 million. If it's 1.3 or 1.5 to do the entire general election, which is, you know, one list goes out to all registered voters with, you know, a lot of similar articles, I bet it's going to be a lot more expensive to each town meeting day do those. And that's one of the things that we need to think through is how do we do that efficiently and effectively? So since we haven't done that yet, I don't think now's the time. So I won't be supporting this myself personally, but I do think it's important for us to continue to look at these issues and figure out where we can be in the future. Representative Chase.
Yeah, I very, very strongly support universal mail-in voting for everything, and yeah, also remote access to everything. But I also have heard from several towns that really like the way that they do their town meetings, and that, you know, the whole doing stuff from the floor, and there's a lot of investment in that historical process. So I don't think I could support forcing those towns to change without hearing a lot more from them and their process to modify how they run the meetings.
Representative Cooper.
I agree with that position, although I think the general idea of everybody getting access to a ballot without restriction or anything else is important enough that we might consider at some point in the future getting a bunch of people together to sit around over the summer to see how we could actually make it happen, both economically and quite frankly palatable enough that old stalwarts would agree that it might be worth trying.
Anybody else have any last words before we take a position? All right. So yes,
I do. I'm going to take issue with the way our actions are being categorized here, that we're discounting voters for town meeting and separating them from general election voters. I think if this was a serious proposal, it would have been on the wall in January, and all these questions would have been answered along with a fiscal note. And as it is, I think it's it's a headline without a story. And to characterize our actions as discounting voters, I think is misinformation. And I don't think it characterizes the work of this committee or that we do on all our bills. If this was a fully fleshed out proposal, we would have been able to give it more time, more effort, and find a way to do it.
Can I just say, I don't think we anticipated this tax problem to have bills on the wall in January.
Well, I think what Representative Nowicki might be getting at is that if the principle is so important that we have universal vote by mail, we're going to have town meeting elections every year. And yeah, so. All right. Any other thoughts before we take a position here? I think I like to put these forward as a positive question. So those in favor of the TÜV amendment, please give me a thumbs up. Those opposed to the TÜV amendment. So that is, I think that's a 12-0, or yes, we have a representative. Yes. So Representative, thank you for bringing us the amendment. We will keep talking about mailed ballots for those Australian ballot towns in the future, but not for today. Thank you all. This was a really good discussion, and I really appreciate just everybody being able to do things at the last minute in this place. It's pretty incredible. Deputy Secretary coming across the street, 15 minutes notice. Great. We have a busy day scheduled for tomorrow, of course. I think there'll be some changes made to the agenda potentially. I think what I might do is truncate the last bit of our work. I think we may be able to get through the first, the new draft of the miscellaneous ethics bill tomorrow a little faster, and then be able to pick back up our work on H641 and see if we can actually do the vote on that final draft if we're ready. So I'm going to add that to the agenda for tomorrow late in the morning for a possible markup and vote again. Let's take a look at a new draft and see if we're ready. But with that, we'll adjourn.